My name is Brianna Whitaker. I'm 34 years old and I work as a payroll specialist in Raleigh, North Carolina. I live in a small brick townhouse with my husband Daniel and our 6-year-old daughter Lily. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We paid our bills, took one modest vacation a year, and spent most weekends at home. Daniel's family lived very differently. The Whitakers owned several luxury apartment buildings, a construction company, and a chain of upscale furniture stores across North Carolina. They had money, influence, and the kind of social reputation people protected like it was priceless. For years, I thought marrying into that family was a blessing. I didn't know I was walking into a carefully protected secret. And when they eventually ruined my life, they made one mistake. They assumed I would be too broken to fight back. I met Daniel at a charity event when I was 27. He wasn't flashy like his parents. He was quiet, funny, and surprisingly humble. At first, his family treated me warmly. His mother Evelyn always hugged me when I arrived. His father Richard shook my hand and called me the sensible one. His younger sister Paige invited me shopping and constantly told me how lucky she was to have me as a sister-in-law. But after Daniel and I got married, things slowly changed. Evelyn started making little comments about my job. "You still work in payroll?" She'd ask with a smile. I would laugh it off. "It pays the bills." She would smile. "Of course it does." I didn't realize then that she had already decided I didn't belong. Daniel, however, always defended me. That was why I trusted him. Then Daniel's father offered him a position in the family construction company. Daniel accepted and suddenly his schedule changed. Late meetings became normal, weekend trips appeared. Phone calls stopped when I entered rooms. Whenever I asked what was happening, Daniel kissed my forehead and said, "It's just business." I believed him until one afternoon I received a letter from our mortgage company. It said our house was in danger of foreclosure. I stared at the letter for several minutes before I could breathe. Our mortgage had always been paid automatically. I called Daniel. He didn't answer. I checked our joint account. The money was gone. Almost $40,000 had disappeared over several months. When Daniel finally came home that night, I held the bank statements in front of him. "Where did our money go?" His face changed. "It's complicated." "No, it's $40,000. Explain it." He sat down. "My father needed temporary help with a business deal." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "He took our daughter's savings. I was going to replace it." When he didn't answer, then he said something I'll never forget. "You need to trust me." I stared at him. "I trusted you. That's how this happened." The next morning, Daniel left the house. 3 days later, he filed for divorce, and somehow the story became my fault. His family told everyone I was unstable. Evelyn called me selfish. Paige told relatives that I had pressured Daniel for money. Richard's attorney sent me a letter accusing me of financial misconduct. Then I discovered something worse. Several documents showed that money from Daniel's family company had been transferred into accounts connected to me. I hadn't authorized any of it, but on paper it looked like I had. I lost my job 2 weeks later. My employer told me they had received information suggesting I had participated in payroll fraud. I knew immediately who was behind it. The Whitakers had money, they had lawyers, they had connections. I had a 6-year-old daughter, a nearly foreclosed house, and a reputation that was collapsing around me. For 3 weeks I barely slept. I cried in my car before picking Lily up from school. I stopped answering friends because I was embarrassed. One night Lily found me sitting on the kitchen floor. "Mommy, are you okay?" I wiped my face. "I'm just tired." She hugged me and something inside me changed. I realized I couldn't spend the rest of my life begging people to believe me. The next morning I stopped fighting emotionally. I started fighting carefully. I hired an attorney using what little savings I had left. Then I began documenting everything: bank statements, emails, text messages, employment records, mortgage records, every accusation, every date, every phone call. I also requested copies of the financial records related to the transactions that had supposedly been made in my name. That was when I noticed something strange. The account numbers didn't belong to me. They belonged to a company I'd never heard of. The company was called Whitaker Consulting Group. I searched the state business records. The company had been registered 3 years earlier. The listed manager was Paige. I stared at the screen. Why would Paige have a company receiving money from the family construction business? I showed everything to my attorney. She became very quiet. "Contact them," she said. "Let us investigate." So I waited, and waiting was harder than revenge. Weeks passed. Then my attorney discovered that Whitaker Consulting Group had received hundreds of thousands of dollars from several construction projects. The payments had been described as consulting fees, but there was a problem. There were no actual consulting contracts, no employees, no office, no legitimate business activity. It appeared to be a shell company. And then we found the connection to me. Several payments had been disguised as reimbursements in my name. Someone had created paperwork making it look like I had received money. That was why the accusations against me looked believable. They weren't trying to steal my money. They were building a story where I was the criminal. Then came the twist I never expected. One evening my attorney called. "There's another person involved." "Who?" She paused. "Daniel." My heart dropped. I already knew he had betrayed me, but I didn't know how deeply. Daniel hadn't simply taken money from our account. He had signed documents connected to the shell company, and he had used my personal information without my knowledge. But there was something else. My attorney had found an old email from Daniel to Paige. The subject line was simple: "Mom and Dad can't know." Email explained that Daniel had discovered their father's company was moving money through the shell company. He was afraid his parents would blame him for knowing about it, so instead of reporting it, he joined them. Then when their financial situation became unstable, they needed someone to blame. They chose me. I read that email 3 times. The man I had defended for years had known. He knew and he let me lose everything. The final hearing came months later. The Whitakers arrived with expensive lawyers and confident expressions. Richard wouldn't look at me. Evelyn stared at me like I was still the problem. Paige sat beside her. Daniel looked exhausted. My attorney presented the records, the shell company, the transfers, the fake reimbursements, the altered documents, the emails. Then she presented the message between Daniel and Paige. The room became silent. Richard turned toward his son. Knew. Daniel looked down. Paige started crying. Evelyn whispered, "This isn't what it looks like." The first time I almost laughed. Those were the exact words they had used when I was still trying to save my marriage. Now they meant nothing. The financial investigation expanded beyond my case. The family business was audited. Several questionable transactions were uncovered. My accusations were formally withdrawn and the claims against me collapsed. My former employer offered me my job back, but I declined. By then I had started consulting independently for small businesses. I had learned more about financial records during those terrible months than I ever imagined possible. Eventually, I built a small payroll and compliance consulting company of my own. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Daniel and I divorced. He admitted what he had done. I didn't forgive him immediately, maybe I never fully will, but I stopped letting his choices define me. The Whitakers didn't lose everything. Real life isn't that simple. But they lost the one thing they had spent decades protecting: their reputation. The people who once admired them began asking questions. Business partners became cautious, friends disappeared, and the family that had treated me like I was beneath them suddenly couldn't control the story anymore. A year after everything happened, I drove past one of their furniture stores with Lily in the back seat. She pointed at the building. "Mommy, is that the place where those mean people worked?" I smiled. "Yes." "Do we hate them?" I looked at her through the rearview mirror. "No." She looked confused. "Why not?" I thought about everything they had taken from me: my marriage, my career, my savings, my peace. Then I thought about what they couldn't take: my ability to rebuild. "No," I said, "because I don't want to spend my life carrying them around in my heart." Lily smiled and looked out the window. I kept driving. For a long time I thought exposing the Whitaker secret was my revenge. It wasn't. The real revenge was discovering that they could destroy my circumstances without ever having the power to destroy me. They thought money made them untouchable. They were wrong. Because eventually the truth doesn't need to be rich. It just needs someone brave enough to stop being afraid of it.